In a nation where we're meant to be proud, I find myself horrified.
We are feeling exhausted, depleted, angry and overwhelmed by the escalating crisis and the heartbreaking number of women being killed in our country.
We are here today very specifically to talk about the women who have lost their lives. I want to acknowledge and honour all of those women.
The past few weeks have been very confronting. We called these what we at the time struggled about what we were going to call them, crisis talks, just over 2 weeks ago. And since that time, 4 more women have lost their lives.
People who work in the front line of domestic violence came to Canberra today for crisis talks on murdered and missing women. It's come on the back of a wave of horrific murders and community calls for action.
We have a target in that national plan of reducing homicides by 25% every year. We are absolutely not on track for that.
Looming over the talks today was the haunting image of a young woman from Forbes, Molly Ticehurst, allegedly killed by a partner who was out on bail after being charged with a series of violent offences against her, including rape and intimidation.
Molly was so brave after so long to ask for help, and it killed her.
While the meeting was focused on women who have lost their lives, not necessarily just at the hands of their partners, but also through seeing suicide as their only way out, the repeated message was that every aspect of the system had to be engaged to help fix it, from frontline services to the legal system to income support.
When you look at the whole spectrum of what happens in domestic violence, all of our systems interact badly. I mean, the police don't act well with the courts, so the bail system doesn't work with the police, the welfare system doesn't work well with the justice system. I mean, we've been hearing quite a lot of examples this morning during this roundtable where one part of the system knows that a woman is in danger or knows that a man is actually talking about wanting to do harm.
The contradictions in the way systems work include things like the fact that a woman may get a restraining order against her former partner in a state magistrate's court, but that will be overridden by a ruling from the Federal Family Court, ordering that a perpetrator of violence must have access to children.
The cognitive dissonance with having one system acknowledge that you need protection and the other system saying you need to hand your children over to that person that you got protection from, it's just inhumane. And too often it's incredibly dangerous.
The first place a woman fleeing domestic violence might go is a refuge like this one. Beryl's Women's Shelter was the first in Canberra and is now the longest running in Australia. Chief Executive Robin Martin has worked there for 25 years.
There might be women who are from a non-English speaking background, so there may be immigration issues that they're coming with. There could be the fact that they don't have an income at all. So Centrelink is the next step. It could be that we need to provide them with some food, enrolling kids in different schools to where they normally go.
Janie is one of the thousands of women who have fled domestic violence.
Initially I was just couch surfing, and then I managed to secure a small unit, and I didn't have, when I left my relationship, I didn't have anything initially.
She walked out of her family home with very little, including the business that she had run from home. She was a recipient of the pilot scheme made permanent last week by Prime Minister Albanese in a $925 million pledge, which gives $5,000 to women fleeing violence.
When I left my home, I was refused access to getting any of my property out of the home. So it supported that in getting a bed and a mattress and linen and a dining table and a fridge and a washing machine.
But there are never enough places, and whether a woman and her children seek safety in a shelter or somewhere else, there is a lot to be done, potentially navigating the police, legal aid, financial support and housing. The shock of so many deaths seemed to galvanise politicians, both federal and state, into action. Notably, not just offering once-off measures, but commitments to long-term and wide-ranging change.
Today we determined some actions we could take immediately, but also looking towards how we change behaviour, how we change the agenda.
And the message from my government today is more needs to be done. We're very sorry that this package was not released or announced earlier, but we're determined to learn from the mistakes that have been made by my government and previous governments.
We're talking a lot about reforming bail laws in New South Wales. Now, I do a lot of judicial education, and the magistrates who, do intervention orders, who will decide on bail, they are facing lists of 60 to 80 matters a day. And when you are so under-resourced, it doesn't matter how much training you have, if they don't have the time to properly consider a matter, or if that matter is being, deferred to a registrar who maybe doesn't have the training at all in this area, then there's going to be mistakes made.
You may not even have a chance to get into this broken system, however, if you can't get legal aid.
Unfortunately, that is only available to 8% of all Australian households, so you have to be very poor to be able to access a grant of aid. Unfortunately, due to the under-resourcing, we are really limited in who we can represent. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can also mean that they choose to remain in the relationship because they just can't navigate the system without that support.
Journalist and academic Anne Summers wrote a seminal report in 2022 entitled The Choice: Violence or Poverty.
Well, when I did my report, the number was 90,000 women had stayed, who wanted to leave, had stayed because they had no money.
Domestic violence is not something that just affects poor families, and according to journalist and domestic violence educator Jess Hill, it is in middle-class homes that the undetected dangers and the real dangers of a woman being murdered can lurk.
Two of the major profiles of homicide offenders are fixated threat, that's a third, who are mostly middle class, low contact or no contact with the criminal justice system, and almost not using any type of physical form of coercive control. So they're doing high control, high surveillance, very high levels of degradation and threats. But those people are largely invisible to the criminal justice system until they commit homicide. So people, cases that might ring a bell for people is like Rowan Baxter killing Hannah Clark and their 3 children. He is a classic fixated threat offender. At the moment when women go to the criminal justice system, to police, even sometimes to services, and describe high degrees of coercive control that don't include physical violence, too often they've been turned away and say, come back when he hits you.
As the programme continues, I want to let you know that there is help available if you need it. Call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline 1800 RESPECT on 1800 737 732.